We're back once again talking about the Seattle Kraken expansion draft that is now less than 2 months away. And today, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Can we just draft their third jersey? I know it doesn't quite fit Seattle's theme, but they used to put cannons on ships, so I'm sure they could find a way to make it work. Plus, the colors aren't that far off. Wait, they can't draft it? Well then. Real quick, if you do find yourself enjoying this video at any point and you like to do that kind of thing, the subscribe button down there can probably help you out. The Blue Jackets are another team that had a rough 2021 season, and while it may not have been quite as unexpected for them as it may have been for some other teams in a similar situation, nobody expected the Blue Jackets to be as bad as they were. But while this season certainly would be one that Columbus fans would be eager to forget, unfortunately it may be hard to do so, as it will be one that has a lasting effect on the franchise, as during the season they traded future face of the franchise type of players with the Jets, and now are watching Dubois and those Jets go to the second round of the playoffs after having swept the Oilers. And while many of their fans, and maybe even some of their players, may have been ready to see it happen, the firing or mutual parting ways with John Tortorella as the head coach at the end of the season certainly will be something that also shakes things up moving forward. So as we now get into the offseason and the upcoming expansion draft, it's hard to say exactly what direction the Blue Jackets see themselves going in the near future, and because of that, very little is a given coming into the expansion draft. But they still do get to protect at least 7 forwards and 3 defensemen if that's the route they choose to go, which I think is probably the most likely one for them. And as we get into that protection list on the forward end, there aren't any movement clauses, so nothing's 100% for sure, but the fact that they'll be protecting Patrick Laine is basically as close as you can come to 100%, even with him not quite yet having signed an extension and being set to be an RFA at the end of the season. And Jack Roslovic, who also came over to them from Columbus, also performed pretty well over the course of this season, so I think it's pretty safe to say that he gets protected. Filling out the rest of the list, I have Cam Atkinson, Gustav Nyquist, Max Domi, Boone Jenner, and Oliver Bjorkstrand. Again, most of those guys I would hesitate to say are 100% safe, but I feel pretty good about this list, all things considered, at least at the time being. Though it is probably still worth mentioning that if they wanted to go with this protection list, they still would have to sign and expose one of Kevin Stenlund or Mikhail Grigorenko in order to meet the exposure requirements. Meanwhile, on the defensive end, though, they are already covered as far as exposure requirements are concerned, as long as they only protect 3 defensemen, which I don't really see why they wouldn't. Here, I also feel pretty good about the fact that Seth Jones, Zach Werenski, and Vladislav Gavrikov are all pretty likely to end up protected. And then in goal, it's also not particularly hard to figure out that Jonas Korpisalo is going to end up getting that protection spot. So then, as far as the players that this protection list would leave open for the Kraken to pick from, on the forward end, the only guy currently with a contract and probably the best option on the forward end would be Eric Robinson. The soon-to-be 26-year-old left-shotted winger has now played in at least one game of 4 different NHL seasons across the course of his career, having played 122 games mostly in the last 3 seasons, where he has 30 points on 15 goals and 15 assists. Most of that coming this last season, where he had 18 points in 56 games on 8 goals and 10 assists. So he definitely isn't a standout player necessarily in any specific way, though he is a tough net front type of forward who's looking to chip in a few goals from there, and definitely isn't afraid to lay a hit or two over the course of a game. And considering that he has spent pretty much the entirety of his career, at least to this point, in a bottom 6 type of role on the forward end, which is probably what he would serve in Seattle if he were to contribute for the Kraken, he does have pretty good possession stats, which is something that you're definitely looking for from that type of player, with a career Corsi for percentage of 51.6 and a career expected plus minus of 1.7. Again, neither one a particularly big standout type of number, but definitely pretty solid for a bottom 6 forward. The other big upside that Robinson has going for him, though, is again that he is already under contract through next season and on a pretty reasonable deal, as he'll be making less than $1 million at $975,000. So, especially considering the Kraken aren't going to have too much trouble meeting that minimum amount of salary that they have to pick in the expansion draft, which is $49 million, having a few guys like Robinson who aren't going to be on very big contracts and really in his case are on pretty small contracts is definitely going to be something that they're going to look for so that they have some cap space left to be able to make some big moves in free agency. The rest of the potential options on the forward end that I could maybe see the Kraken going with are all currently set to be RFAs at the end of the season, though one of them in Kevin Stenlund could still end up seeing an extension in order to fit those exposure requirements. Next to Robinson, Stenlund is probably the next most likely option on the forward end of a player the Kraken could end up going with. The former second-round pick, 24-year-old forward who importantly does have some experience playing center, has played now in at least part of 4 different NHL seasons, having played 68 games in that time where he has 20 points on 11 goals and 9 assists, now with back-to-back seasons of 10 points in 32 games. So again, another guy that's not likely to be blowing anybody out of the water as far as his points production is concerned, and again, while he can play center, doesn't necessarily have the best face-off percentage with a career 44.8. And also, at least to this point in his career, doesn't show quite the same amount of upside when it comes to his possession stats as we saw with Robinson, where he is at a 48.2 as far as his Corsi for percentage over the course of those 3 seasons, and is just barely positive with a .3 expected plus-minus in his career. But again, centers are harder to find, and with his 6'4", 200-pound frame, he certainly could turn into a pretty solid physical third-line player, though he has yet to show much physicality in his game so far to this point in his career, so that might be asking something of him that he hasn't really been able to do so far. But again, another guy that could potentially slot in and contribute on a third or fourth line for Seattle. A couple of other guys that I could at least give an outside chance to maybe getting selected that would fill a little bit more of the prospect role would be one, Cole Sherwood, who is a 24-year-old that has seen at least a little bit of NHL play, but has spent most of the last couple of seasons at the AHL level, last year with 13 points in 43 games, and this year with 4 points in 9. Though I would think if they were going to go more the route of picking an RFA prospect type of player, a guy like Cliff Pu would probably be a little bit more likely, because outside of having a fantastic name, he is a little bit younger, being just 22 years old, and also because Sherwood doesn't have a whole lot as far as what he's proved at either the AHL or NHL level. While Pu hasn't seen any NHL play yet, he also has had a bit of an up and down AHL experience so far, but at least this last season looked much better than he has in the past, with 10 points in 16 games. Though with Pu, I'm not exactly sure how likely it is he would end up in Seattle, because although Kraken assistant GM Jason Botterill does have some experience with him, it might not be the best experience, as Pu was part of the trade that Botterill made in order to acquire Jeff Skinner, so that might cause some flashbacks that Botterill might want to avoid. Oh, and before we move on to the defensive end, it's probably also worth mentioning that Alex Texier is exempt from the draft, so don't worry about him not being protected. He doesn't have to be. On the defensive end, there's probably only one guy I really could see the Kraken potentially going with, and that is the one guy that would be left exposed with a contract given those 3 that we had protected, and that would be Dean Kukan. The 27-year-old left-shotted defenseman has played in 112 games across 5 NHL seasons, in that time having just 19 points on 2 goals and 17 assists, though both of those goals and 8 of those assists have come in the last 2 years. Like pretty much any of the guys we talked about on the forward end, Kukan on the defensive end is also not particularly likely to see much playing time near the top of the rotation. Though, again, like Robinson, Dean, while probably being more of a third pair type of defenseman, does have pretty decent career possession stats considering his role, where he has a 50.5 Corsi for percentage and a 4.6 career expected plus-minus, both of which definitely the types of thing you would want to see from a lower pair defenseman, or really any player, but it certainly helps to have that throughout the depth of your lineup. Really the only thing Kukan could potentially have over, say, Robinson on the forward end, though, would be a little bit more NHL experience and being a little bit more of a veteran player, but as there are plenty of very good veteran options the Kraken can get from other teams, I'm not too sure that if they're looking for veteran presence in the locker room that they're going to be looking to Columbus or Kukan in order to get it. Meanwhile, if they wanted a little bit more of a prospect level player on the defensive end, then Gabriel Carlsson would probably be their best bet there. Again, he's set to be an RFA at the end of the season, so this would mean picking an RFA player. But he's at least shown a little bit more promise, though again, probably is not the type of guy that's going to come up and serve in a top 4 type of role for the Kraken anytime soon. But he did at least contribute some for the Blue Jackets over the last season, putting up 4 points in 14 games in the 2021 season, so there is at least a little bit of promise potentially there. And again with him, this is another player with a bit of a bigger frame, being 6'5", 200 pounds, so he could potentially be coached into maybe being a little bit more of a physical shutdown type of defenseman down the road, but that's a lot of speculation and hoping for the best. For the Blues, though, it doesn't just end at the defensive end for at least potential options, as there is one potential goaltender here that the Kraken could look at as, again, more of a prospect type of goalie that they would put in the AHL at least to start out with. That being the 24-year-old Matthias Kivlenieks. In his NHL career so far, Kivlenieks has only played in 8 games, in that time having right around a .900 save percentage and right around 3 goals per game allowed, so certainly not amazing, but it's not a huge sample size to go off of. Meanwhile, his AHL career did not get off to a particularly strong start, as in both of his first 2 seasons he was well below the .900 line and decently above 3 goals per game allowed. However, over the last couple of seasons, he has shown noticeable improvement, and this season was certainly his best, with a .929 save percentage and a 2.25 goals per game allowed. So very, very much improved, at least from those first couple of seasons, and even from last year. So if he can keep that up and continue to produce at the AHL level and improve at the AHL level, then he certainly could be an NHL goalie down the road. As far as any potential side deals or trades between the Kraken and Blue Jackets, I don't see really any reason that one would happen here. The Blue Jackets just don't have any incentive to go out of their way to make a trade with Seattle. They don't have any terrible contracts that they have to get out from under, and they aren't, at least as things are set up right now, set up in a way that they're going to be losing a potential difference-making type of player to the Kraken. So they may as well just let Seattle take one player and be done with it. So ultimately, when it comes to the Blue Jackets and the expansion draft, assuming that this protection list I have is at least pretty close to the one they end up going with, and that their third jerseys are protected from selection by the Kraken, then I would think that Eric Robinson would probably be the most likely pick that the Kraken end up going with. But if Kevin Stenlund does get an extension, and it is a pretty reasonable one, then the Kraken could also potentially go with him instead. Otherwise, there is always the chance that the Kraken go with more of a prospect level pick, but I don't know that there's any guys that necessarily stand out in a significant way as far as that's concerned for the Kraken to go out of their way here to take one of those guys over somebody with a pretty reasonable looking contract in Robinson or potentially Stenlund. And if they were to go that more prospect level pick, I don't think that Kivlenieks is necessarily a bad option, as they will need a goalie or two in the AHL, and he definitely could serve pretty well there as he tries to develop into a potential NHL goalie down the road. And that will bring us to the end of this one. So if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below. If you think you would have a different protection list than what I had here, or different thoughts on who you would like to see the Kraken take, please let me know about that down in the comments section. Otherwise, stay safe out there and be good to each other. Peace.